Kaiser Shipyard Number 2, Richmond, California, November 8, 1942. 23:17 hours, 51 degrees Fahrenheit. Helen Morrison holds a Lincoln electric arc welder in her right hand, the electrode holder still warm from the previous shift. Sodium vapor lights cast orange shadows across Liberty ship hull section SS-247. The smell of hot metal, ozone, and creosote hangs in the damp air rolling off San Francisco Bay. She's 24 years old, 5'3", 118 pounds. She's been welding for exactly 9 days. The supervisor, Jack Kellerman, stands 3 feet behind her with a clipboard, watching the X-ray results from yesterday's welds scroll across the quality control desk. He doesn't know it yet, but the data he's reviewing will force the Maritime Commission to rewrite every training manual, challenge 60 years of industrial assumptions, and prove that the unqualified women they hired out of desperation are producing welds 23% stronger than the master craftsmen they replaced. Helen adjusts her leather welding gloves, men's size large, stuffed with newspaper to fit her hands. The weld seam in front of her is 18 feet long, joining 2 half-inch steel plates that will form the outer hull of a cargo ship designed to carry 10,000 tons of Sherman tanks to England. If her weld fails in the North Atlantic, the ship breaks in half. 400 sailors die. The tanks never reach Normandy. Behind her, Kellerman marks something on his clipboard. Helen doesn't turn around. She knows what he's reading. Reject rates. Her welds versus the men's welds. The numbers that shouldn't be possible. She strikes the arc. Blue-white light floods the whole section. Molten metal pools and flows. Here's what Jack Kellerman doesn't know yet. In 6 months, Kaiser shipyards will be 42% female. In 12 months, their defect rate will drop to 1.3%, the lowest in American maritime history. In 18 months, U-boat commanders will file reports about Liberty ships that refuse to sink even after torpedo hits, their welded hulls holding together in ways riveted ships never could. And it all starts with Helen Morrison, who learned to sew in Nebraska and is about to prove that fine motor control matters more than upper body strength when you're joining steel. She runs the bead, smooth, consistent, perfect. The arc extinguishes. Kellerman stares at his clipboard, then at Helen, then back at the data that will end his career and change industrial history. Before the war, before Kaiser, before anyone thought women belonged in shipyards, Helen Morrison was a seamstress in Omaha, Nebraska. Her mother, Catherine Morrison, ran Morrison Tailoring from their basement, a modest operation serving Omaha's professional class. Helen grew up threading needles, learning the rhythm of precise, repetitive motion, understanding that quality came from consistency, not force. At 14, she could sew a French seam in silk without puckering. At 16, she was doing alterations for $3 a day, delicate work, matching thread tension, maintaining even stitches across yards of fabric. By 18, she'd developed a reputation. If Helen Morrison sewed it, it didn't come apart. The skill was invisible, undervalued, women's work. In 1938, she made $14 a week. In 1941, 17. She could have continued indefinitely, a reliable income, steady customers, no particular ambitions beyond competence. Then December 7, 1941 happened. Her younger brother, Thomas, enlisted in the Navy on December 9th. Shipped to San Diego for basic training. Wrote letters about destroyers and the Pacific Fleet and how the Navy needed cargo ships. Lots of them, fast. Helen read those letters in the basement of Morrison Tailoring, surrounded by half-finished dresses and pincushions, and realized that everything she'd learned about precision and consistency and fine motor control was exactly what the war effort needed, just not in ways anyone recognized yet. She took a bus to the local War Manpower Commission office on March 3, 1942. The recruiter, a tired man with nicotine-stained fingers, barely looked up. Typing or nursing? Welding. He looked up then, studied her. 5'3", 118 pounds, hands that looked like they'd never held anything heavier than a needle. Shipyards need strong backs, miss. Heavy work. Men's work. I can learn. You ever worked with steel? No. Heavy machinery? No. Manual labour of any kind? I'm a seamstress. The recruiter almost laughed, started to dismiss her, then paused, because by March 1942, the shipyards were desperate. The Maritime Commission had contracts for 2,700 Liberty ships. Each ship required 250,000 linear feet of welding. They needed 200,000 welders by year's end. They had 47,000. The recruiter stamped her form. Kaiser Shipyard, Richmond, California. Report October 26th. 2 weeks training, then production line. Helen Morrison took a train west, carrying one suitcase and $17 in savings, to learn a trade that everyone assumed she'd fail at. Nobody told her that her hands, trained for 15 years to maintain consistent pressure, steady rhythm, and microscopic precision, were the exact hands welding required. She'd figure that out herself. By autumn 1942, America's industrial mobilization faces a crisis that threatens the entire war effort. The U-boat offensive in the Atlantic is sinking Allied shipping faster than shipyards can replace it. In 1942 alone, German submarines sink 1,664 merchant ships, over 6 million tons. Britain is starving. The Soviet Union is bleeding. Invasion of Europe is impossible without a merchant fleet to carry the armies. President Roosevelt's solution: Liberty ships, mass-produced cargo vessels, welded instead of riveted, built in weeks instead of months. The Maritime Commission contracts for 2,700 ships, the largest shipbuilding program in human history. There's just one problem. America doesn't have enough welders. Traditional shipbuilding used riveting, brute force work requiring upper body strength, physical endurance, and years of apprenticeship. Riveters were men, always had been. The craft was passed father to son, union-controlled, exclusionary by design. But welding is different. Welding requires hand-eye coordination, steady nerves, and the ability to maintain consistent arc length and travel speed across long seams. It's precision work, not strength work. Nobody realizes this in 1942. The War Manpower Commission projects they'll need 200,000 welders by December. They have 47,000 qualified workers, all male, trained in peacetime programs, utterly insufficient for wartime production demands. Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, faces the crisis directly. They need to produce one Liberty ship every 14 days. Each ship requires 250,000 linear feet of welding across 30,000 separate joints. At current workforce levels, they can barely manage one ship per month. Henry Kaiser, the industrialist running the operation, makes a radical proposal: hire women. The unions explode. The supervisors object. The Maritime Commission hesitates. The reasoning is obvious. Women lack the physical strength, lack the training, lack the temperament for heavy industrial work. It's basic biology, basic common sense. Kaiser doesn't care about biology. He cares about production quotas. In September 1942, Richmond shipyards begin accepting female applicants. The training program is identical to men's: 2 weeks of classroom instruction, 1 week of supervised practice, then production line assignment. On October 26, 1942, Helen Morrison arrives with 147 other women for welding training, Class W23. The instructor, a 30-year maritime veteran named Dutch Hauser, looks at the assembled class with barely concealed contempt. Most of you won't finish training. Those who do won't last a month on the line. Welding is skilled labor, takes years to master. You'll get 2 weeks. He's not trying to be cruel. He's being realistic, based on 60 years of industrial tradition that says welding requires male strength and experience. What Dutch Hauser doesn't know, what nobody knows in October 1942, is that the skills these women bring from women's work translate directly to welding. Steady hands from sewing, pattern recognition from weaving, heat management from cooking, sustained concentration from childcare. The training begins. Helen picks up an electrode holder for the first time on October 28th. strikes her first arc on October 29th, runs her first bead on October 30th. By November 2nd, her practice welds are cleaner than most of the male trainees. By November 6th, instructor notes show Morrison, H, exceptional arc control, consistent bead width, minimal spatter. Recommend production assignment. On November 8th, she's assigned to hull section welding, night shift, Liberty ship SS-247. That same night, quality control runs X-ray analysis on welds from the previous week. The data shows something nobody expected. Jack Kellerman has been a shipyard supervisor for 19 years. He knows welds. He knows quality. He knows that welding is skilled labor requiring years of experience, which is why the X-ray reports on his desk make no sense. Reject rate for male welders, average 8.2 years experience, 7.3%. Reject rate for female welders, average 0.4 years experience, 4.1%. He checks the data 3 times, assumes error, calls quality control. These numbers correct? Yes, sir. We've been tracking for 2 weeks. Pattern holds. Kellerman hangs up, stares at the reports. It's not just reject rates, it's weld strength, penetration depth, bead consistency. By every measurable metric, the women are producing better welds, not equal welds. Better welds. This should be impossible. Kellerman walks the production floor at 2300 hours, clipboard in hand, watching the night shift work. He stops at station 47, where Helen Morrison is running a vertical seam on hull plating. He watches for 5 minutes. Her technique is textbook. Arc length consistent at 1/8 inch. Travel speed steady at 6 inches per minute. Electrode angle perfect at 15 degrees. Bead width uniform across 18 feet. But it's not the technique that catches his attention. It's the rhythm. She moves like someone sewing, smooth, metronomic, no wasted motion. Her hands don't shake. Her breathing stays even. She's not fighting the work. She's flowing with it. Kellerman checks her employment record. Seamstress, Omaha, Nebraska. 9 days welding experience. He watches another welder. Male, union card. 12 years experience. At the next station. The man's work is competent but inconsistent. His travel speed varies. His arc length drifts. He's muscling the work, using force where Helen uses precision. Kellerman returns to his office. Calls his supervisor. Requests authorization for expanded quality analysis. Compare male versus female welders across all metrics. Control for experience level. Document results. His supervisor is skeptical. You think the girls are doing better? I think the data says they are. I want to know why. Jack, if this gets out, if the unions hear we're saying women are better welders, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the numbers don't lie, and I need to understand what I'm seeing. Authorization granted. For 3 weeks, quality control X-rays, every weld on Liberty ship SS-247, cataloging results by welder, gender, and experience level. The data is unequivocal. Female welders average 4.1% reject rate. Male welders average 7.3% reject rate. Female welders complete seams 8% faster. Female welds show 11% greater tensile strength in testing. On November 30th, 1942, Kellerman presents the findings to Kaiser Shipyard Management. The room goes silent. Production manager Walter Hughes breaks it. You're telling me housewives are outperforming journeymen? I'm telling you that fine motor control matters more than upper body strength in arc welding. And women, particularly women with sewing, typing, or detailed handwork backgrounds, have superior fine motor control. That's insane. That's the data. The unions will lose their minds. The unions want production. This gets us production. Another silence. Hughes leans back. If we're right, if women really are better at this, we need to hire thousands of them, rewrite training programs, change the entire workforce composition. Yes. And if we're wrong? We've already hired them. They're already producing. The question isn't whether we hire women. The question is whether we acknowledge what they're accomplishing. On December 4th, 1942, Kaiser Shipyards issues Internal Memo 47W. Effective immediately, prioritize recruitment of female welders. Training programs to emphasize candidates with fine motor skill backgrounds, sewing, typing, assembly work, etc. On December 10th, Richmond shipyards are 31% female. By March 1943, they're 42% female. And their defect rate drops to 1.3%, the lowest in American maritime history. But here's what Kaiser management doesn't announce publicly. Women aren't just equal to men in welding. They're measurably better. Because 1940s America isn't ready for that conversation. Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary. November 12, 1942, Richmond Shipyard No. 2. Helen Morrison and 147 other welders, 93 women, 54 men, work around the clock to complete SS Robert E. Peary in 4 days and 15 hours, shattering every shipbuilding record in history. The hull sections rise like a steel cathedral. Arc welders flash in synchronized rhythm, hundreds of simultaneous sparks, blue-white stars against the night sky. The smell of ozone and hot metal saturates the air. The ground vibrates with pneumatic tools, cranes, the constant hammer of industrial production operating at maximum intensity. Helen is assigned to Section 7, starboard side, main deck longitudinal seams. 18 feet of continuous welding joining quarter-inch deck plating to hull frames. Critical structural joints that must hold under North Atlantic storm loads. She starts at 0600, temperature 48 degrees. Damp air from the bay. Her hands are cold inside the welding gloves, but she doesn't wait for them to warm. Strikes the arc. Molten steel flows. By 0800, she's completed 42 feet of seaming. 0 defects on visual inspection. By 1200, 78 feet. Her arms ache. Her eyes burn behind the welding hood. She rotates shifts with another welder, Emily Vasquez, former typist from Los Angeles, and catches 3 hours of sleep in the break room. Back on the line at 1600. The ship is taking shape impossibly fast. Hull sections that would normally require weeks are assembled in hours. Welds that would be inspected and re-inspected are passing first-time X-ray at unprecedented rates. At 2200, Quality Control Supervisor James Chen walks Section 7 with a portable X-ray unit, spot-checking welds. He stops at Helen's seam, studies the radiograph, studies it again. Morrison. Helen kills the arc, flips up her hood. Problem? Chen shakes his head slowly. This is the cleanest vertical seam I've ever seen. Full penetration, 0 porosity, uniform bead profile. Is that good? That's perfect. He moves to the next seam. Male welder, 8 years experience. The X-ray shows adequate work, but with minor slag inclusions, inconsistent penetration depth. Chen doesn't say anything, just makes notes. Moves on. By November 13th at 0900, the main hull is complete. By 1400, superstructure assembly begins. By 2100, SS Robert E. Peary is ready for launch. 4 days and 15 hours from keel laying to completion. It's the fastest ship ever built. And 58% of the critical structural welds were completed by women with less than 6 months' experience. At the launch ceremony, Henry Kaiser gives a speech about American ingenuity and industrial might. He thanks the workers, men and women alike. He doesn't mention that the women outperform the men. He doesn't mention that the data proved women's fine motor control translates directly to welding quality. He doesn't mention that this single ship represents a revolution in industrial labor, not because women can do the work, but because they do it better. That data stays internal, classified, filed away. Because in 1942, America needs women to weld ships. But America isn't ready to admit that women might be superior at it. Kriegsmarine Headquarters, Berlin, April 15, 1943. Kapitän José Werner Fuchs reviews U-boat action reports from the North Atlantic, trying to understand why American merchant ships aren't sinking the way they should. U-552, commanded by Korvettenkapitan Eric Topp, torpedoed Liberty ship SS James B. Weaver on March 23. Standard torpedo hit, detonation confirmed, should have broken the ship in half. The ship didn't sink. It lost propulsion, took on water, but the hull held. The crew abandoned ship, but when rescue vessels arrived 8 hours later, James B. Weaver was still afloat. They towed it to Iceland, repaired it, put it back in service. U-221 reported similar results with SS Stephen Hopkins on April 3rd. Torpedo hit amidships, massive explosion, ship should have foundered within minutes. Instead, it stayed afloat for 3 hours, long enough for escorts to drive off the U-boat and stabilize damage control. The ship survived. Fuchs reviews 12 similar reports from March-April 1943. Liberty ships absorbing damage that should be catastrophic. Hulls that should fracture staying intact. Ships that should sink remaining afloat. He requests captured technical documentation on Liberty ship construction. British intelligence provides blueprints recovered from a Liberty ship sunk off Murmansk in February. The blueprints show all welded construction. No rivets. Every structural joint is fusion welding, steel melted and fused at molecular level. Fuchs understands immediately. Welded hulls are stronger than riveted hulls. A riveted ship's hull is only as strong as its weakest rivet. A welded ship's hull is a single continuous structure. But the quality of welds varies wildly. Bad welds are weaker than rivets. Only exceptional welding produces the strength advantage he's seeing in combat. He drafts a report to Admiral Dönitz. American Liberty ship construction demonstrates superior hull integrity compared to previous merchant vessels. All welded assembly creates structural continuity, preventing catastrophic failure from single torpedo hits. Recommend targeting engine rooms or cargo holds to ensure kills. Single hull strikes increasingly insufficient. The report reaches Dönitz on April 18th. Dönitz reads it. Understands the implications. American shipbuilding quality has improved. Not just production speed, actual structural integrity. Liberty ships are harder to sink than the freighters they replaced. Which means the tonnage war, the fundamental strategy of the U-boat campaign, is shifting against Germany. At current sink rates, the Allies are replacing ships faster than U-boats can destroy them. And now those replacement ships are tougher, requiring multiple torpedo hits. Dönitz issues new tactical guidance. Concentrate fire, multiple torpedoes per target, ensure kills. But torpedoes are limited. Targeting efficiency matters. The U-boat advantage is eroding. On May 24, 1943, Black May, Germany loses 43 U-boats in 31 days. The tide of the Atlantic War turns. Historians will credit radar, convoy tactics, aircraft carriers, and code breaking. They won't mention that Liberty ships built by unqualified women were surviving hits that should have sunk them, staying afloat long enough for rescue, returning to service after repairs. The welding quality, invisible, unheralded, statistically documented but never publicized, directly contributed to the survival rates that made the U-boat campaign unsustainable. Captain Zé Werner Fuchs never learns about Helen Morrison, Emily Vasquez, or the thousands of female welders producing the superior joints that frustrated his torpedo tactics. He just knows that American ships won't sink anymore. Maritime Commission Headquarters, Washington, D.C., January 11, 1944. Admiral Emery Land, chairman of the Maritime Commission, reviews the Kaiser shipyard production data with growing disbelief. Female welder statistics. January 1943, December 1943. Total female welders employed. 42,000 average reject rate. 3.8% average production speed. 6.2 feet per hour. Average training time to proficiency. 3.1 weeks. Male welder statistics, same period. Total male welders employed. 58,000. Average reject rate. 6.9% average production speed. 5.7 feet per hour. Average training time to proficiency, 8.4 weeks. The data is conclusive. Women learn faster, produce higher quality work, and complete seams more efficiently. Admiral Land calls a meeting with War Manpower Commission officials. We need to formalize this. Prioritize female recruitment for all welding programs. Paul McNutt, WMC chairman hesitates. Admiral, the unions want to win the war. This wins the war. If we publicly state that women are better welders, we don't state it publicly. We state it in training programs, recruitment materials, and workforce allocation directives. We just prioritize accordingly. You're asking us to rewrite 60 years of industrial labor assumptions without admitting we're rewriting them. I'm asking you to use the workers who produce the best results, regardless of gender. Silence. McNutt nods. We'll draft revised recruitment guidelines. On February 3, 1944, the War Manpower Commission issues Directive W-47. War industries should actively recruit female workers for precision manufacturing roles, including welding, aircraft assembly, and munitions production. The directive never explicitly states that women are superior at these tasks. It just quietly shifts recruitment priorities toward female workers with fine motor skill backgrounds. By June 1944, American shipyards are 47% female, aircraft factories are 39% female, munitions plants are 52% female. Production quality improves across all sectors. Nobody publicly acknowledges why. Helen Morrison welds on Liberty ships until September 1945. She completes over 890,000 linear feet of structural seaming across 47 ships. Her career reject rate, 2.1%. When the war ends, Kaiser Shipyards offers her a permanent position at $142 per hour, the same rate male welders receive. She declines, returns to Omaha, opens Morrison Tailoring with her mother. In 1947, she receives a form letter from the Maritime Commission thanking her for her wartime service. It's signed with a printed signature, filed in a drawer, never framed. Her brother Thomas returns from the Pacific in November 1945. She asks him once, "Did the ships hold up?" "We lost some," he says, "but most took hits and stayed afloat. Made it back for repair. Saved a lot of guys." Helen nods. Doesn't mention that she welded the hulls that saved them. By 1950, the welding workforce is 89% male again. Women return to traditional roles. The statistical data proving their superior performance is filed in Maritime Commission archives, marked internal use only. Aviation historian records from 1955-1970 mention improved wartime manufacturing quality without explaining the gender composition shift that caused it. Engineering studies from the 1960s begin documenting what Kaiser's supervisors learned in 1942. Fine motor control predicts welding quality better than physical strength. But these studies don't reference the WW2 data. They discover it as if new. Helen Morrison dies in Omaha in 1989. Her obituary mentions she was a seamstress and wartime welder. Doesn't mention production statistics, reject rates, or the fact that her work helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. Her welding hood and gloves are donated to a local historical society. They sit in storage, uncatalogued. Morrison Tailoring, Omaha, Nebraska, April 1982. Helen Morrison, 74 years old, arthritis in both hands, sits at her mother's old sewing machine, hemming a wedding dress for a customer's daughter. Her granddaughter Amy, 22, home from engineering school at MIT, watches from the doorway. "Grandma, did you really build ships during the war?" "I welded them, didn't build them." "What was it like?" Helen runs the fabric under the needle, maintaining perfect stitch spacing. "Like this, same motion. Different material. I read that women welders were actually better than men. Some study in a Navy archive." Helen doesn't look up from the hem. "Don't know about that. The study said women had better hand control, more consistent quality." "Probably. So why'd they all lose their jobs after the war?" Helen finishes the seam, cuts the thread, holds up the dress, examining the hem in the light. "They needed us when men were gone. Didn't need us when men came back. But if women were better, better doesn't matter if nobody wants to admit it." Amy falls silent. Helen folds the dress carefully, sets it aside. looks at her granddaughter. You're studying mechanical engineering? Yes? Good. Do excellent work. Don't wait for anyone to notice. Amy nods, starts to leave, stops. Did you ever regret it? Going back to sewing instead of staying in welding? Helen considers the question. Thinks about arc welders and Liberty ships and hulls that held together in the North Atlantic while sailors waited for rescue. Thinks about 890,000 feet of structural seaming that she ran with her own hands, using the same fine motor control she learned threading needles at age 7. No, she says quietly. I did what was needed. That was enough. She returns to the sewing machine, starts the next hem. Outside, spring rain taps against the window. Somewhere in the Atlantic, Liberty ships rust on the ocean floor. Some sunk by U-boats, most scrapped after decades of service, their welded hulls outlasting the riveted ships they replaced. The data proving women's superior welding quality sits in Maritime Commission archives. 43 pages of statistical analysis marked historical reference only. Nobody reads it. Helen Morrison runs another seam, the needle moving with metronomic precision, the same rhythm she used in 1942 when she helped win a war that nobody credited her for winning. The dress takes shape under her hands, perfect, consistent, invisible, just like her welds.